with us now from Abbottabad, Pakistan, the town where Osama bin Laden was killed, is Al Jazeera correspondent Imtiaz Tiab. And Imtiaz, give us a sense of, first of all, what went down in that town with the operation, if you can add any details, and also any reaction there.
Well, yes, I'm here in Abbottabad, which is about an hour and a half away from Pakistan's capital city, Islamabad. This is a relatively well-to-do city. It has a lot of mansions, a lot of VIP people, for lack of a better word, that choose to live here. It's a very beautiful location, ringed with mountains. But locals who I've been speaking to say at around 1 a.m. this morning, local time, they heard 4 explosions and then a very loud explosion. An explosion they say was so loud that it shook some of them out of bed. They say that it turned the sky orange. Now, one of these locals who I was speaking to, his name was Asad Khan, he said he rushed to where all this noise and where all this commotion was coming, and he said what he saw was flames and smoke and security personnel surrounding this area. This area, of course, is now the house that we know that Osama bin Laden was captured and killed at in an operation carried out by U.S. forces. But what he didn't say, or rather what he didn't see, were any U.S. soldiers or any U.S. officials of any kind at this house. But he did see an awful lot of smoke, an awful lot of fires at a house which he say many in the community have had many questions about, simply because the people who live there were very secretive.
And we heard reports this morning that no phones in there, no service to and from that compound. In fact, it was so closed off that instead of getting regular garbage pickup, they would burn the trash there. How large is the community, and how hard would it be for suspicions not to be raised for such a compound being built in the middle of this area?
Well, there's sort of 2 answers to this question. We have to keep in mind that, you know, Pakistan is a country of relative uncertainty. So a lot of houses here in Pakistan are compounds, for lack of a better word. They have high walls, they're very heavily fortified, and this could just be somebody's regular home. But this house was a very interesting home, specifically for these neighbors here, the people who lived in this community. They say that we're having conflicting reports over just who this man was, but that they only really saw one man living there, and that the only real interaction with this house was by a man who claims to have gone there on a daily basis selling bread and a chicken to this house. So again, a lot of questions and a lot of being asked rather here in this community over just who these people were. This house, they say, has been owned by this one family for a decade now, but now here we are hearing that the United States became aware of this, or at least appeared in U.S. intelligence as of September of last year. So at least for months now, Osama bin Laden has presumably been living in this house, possibly even years. But of course, it's raised a lot of suspicions and questions, at least with locals here. But what we're also hearing is that it certainly didn't raise any questions about the military, which has a large academy here. In fact, one of the most prestigious military academies in all of Pakistan is less than a kilometer from this house where Osama bin Laden was captured and killed. So many questions. Some of these were raised by the neighbors, but here we have this military academy less than a kilometer away from this house.
I'm just curious, does this suggest, you know, there's such a mystery to Al-Qaeda, there was a mystery about bin Laden, how primal are they, how Neanderthal, how advanced, how are they living, is he living in a cave? Does this kind of in some way show the fact that they were just there in a compound with doesn't seem to be incredible security? Should this give us more peace that these people are more backward than we even imagine? One would think that they would have had him set up a bit better, for lack of a better word. So should this make us feel better?
Well, many had assumed that Osama bin Laden at the very least had been living in the tribal regions of the country. But Abbottabad, again, is only about an hour and a half outside of the capital of Pakistan. It, again, is a very affluent city, for lack of a better word. And it is home to one of Pakistan's most prestigious military academies. And yet, at the same time, Osama bin Laden is known to be living in this house. Now, we have seen some pictures of inside this house shot on amateur mobile phone video. It's a relatively ramshackle-looking place. We've seen sacks of sugar, but again, not a very sophisticated hideout, if you were, for the most wanted fugitive in the world. By no means a sophisticated place, and yet we don't know exactly how long, but possibly for months at least, Osama bin Laden has been living here. So it does beg a lot of questions, just how he wound up here, how he managed to elude captivity for so long, and, you know, again, questions being raised over just what sort of intel led to his capture and killing early this morning.
All right, Imtiaz, thank you so much for that insight and perspective. Really appreciate it.
And welcome to Today on this Monday morning. I'm Meredith Vieira. Matt Lauer is at ground zero where nearly 3,000 people lost their lives on September 11th, 2001. 184 were killed at the Pentagon, 40 others on Flight 93 that crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. We're going to check in with Matt in just a moment. Meanwhile, I want to show you some of the newspapers out this morning. Obviously, the headline front page on everyone has to do with the death of Osama bin Laden. This one, the New York Times, bin Laden killed by U.S. forces in Pakistan, Obama says, declaring justice has been done. Other newspapers, the headline more pointed, the New York Post, got him, vengeance at last. And the Daily News, rot in hell. President Obama made the announcement about Obama's death in a late-night address from the White House. Intelligence officials apparently learned of bin Laden's possible location back in August. And then last Friday, the president felt confident enough to give the order to bring the al-Qaeda leader to justice. In the years after 9/11, we heard so much about bin Laden possibly hiding out in mountain caves, but in the end, he was living in a mansion in a small, affluent town just 35 miles north of the Pakistani capital and just 100 yards away from a Pakistani military academy. NBC News has learned that bin Laden's body was recovered during the raid, and in accordance with Islamic law, it was buried within 24 hours, that burial taking place at sea. We have complete coverage this morning, beginning with NBC Chief White House Correspondent Chuck Todd. Chuck, good morning to you.
Good morning, Meredith. It was an operation 8 months in the planning, with the president personally overseeing 5 meetings in the final 6 weeks as the U.S. government zeroed in on public enemy number 1, Osama bin Laden. It was shortly before midnight when the president announced the news.
Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda.
The president made it clear getting bin Laden was always a top priority.
Shortly after taking office, I directed Leon Panetta, the director of the CIA, to make the killing or capture of bin Laden the top priority of our war against al-Qaeda.
While intelligence officials long suspected bin Laden was hiding out in Pakistan, the exact location was not known until August.
After years of painstaking work by our intelligence community, I was briefed on a possible lead to bin Laden.
That lead, a bin Laden courier whom intelligence operatives had been tracking for years, and he led them to a large compound in an affluent town 35 miles outside of Islamabad, Pakistan.
Last week, I determined that we had enough intelligence to take action and authorized an operation to get Osama bin Laden and bring him to justice.
The president gave that final order Friday morning in the Situation Room, just minutes before leaving Washington to tour the tornado devastation in Alabama. He called the death of bin Laden the most significant achievement to date in our nation's effort to defeat al-Qaeda.
USA! USA! USA!
The news spread quickly and jubilant crowds gathered at the White House.
I wanted to come out here and just show my support for the U.S.
Sunday night, White House officials made dozens of calls to key leaders all over the country. The president personally briefed former Presidents Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, who called it a momentous achievement and added, "The fight against terror goes on, but tonight America has sent an unmistakable message. No matter how long it takes, justice will be done." With nearly 150,000 troops fighting the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, some see this as a big morale boost.
I think it's an enormous shot in the arm to the U.S. Armed Forces. They've had 48,000 killed and wounded fighting the war on terror. So taking down this very iconic figure is a very significant event.
The president called the killing of bin Laden a testament to the greatness of our country. And with the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks just 4 months away, he had a special message for those who lost loved ones in the attack.
Justice has been done.
The administration is still deciding on how to release the visual evidence of the dead bin Laden. Meanwhile, we will hear from the president today around lunchtime as he has a scheduled Medal of Honor ceremony posthumously for 2 Korean War veterans. Meredith.
But Chuck, just so I'm sure of what you're saying, the administration has made a decision that they will release evidence of the body.
They haven't made that decision yet. They realize that that is necessary in some form, so they're still wrangling with how to do that, when to do that, and where to do that.
All right, Chuck Todd, thank you very much.
Conversation, Jack Rice, a former CIA operative, and joins me now to talk about what could be a reassertion of al-Qaeda's power, a reaffirmation of their might in the news now that we know that Osama bin Laden has been killed, and confirmed, Jack, by U.S. sources telling NBC News that he's already been buried at sea, according to Islamic tradition.
Well, Thomas, I agree with you, and I think in the short term, what we're going to see is at least an effort to show relevance. I mean, if we think about where al-Qaeda was even some 10 years ago versus where they are now, they have spread across the globe. In some ways, they're more difficult to deal with when they were more concentrated, but in some ways, because of the loss of the leadership of Osama bin Laden, the ability to show relevance in the short term is something I think they're going to push very, very hard on. So it's one of the things and one of the reasons that the State Department has come out on a worldwide basis saying we need to be more vigilant than ever right now.
But Jack, how organized have they become through the years, or less organized, so to speak, being that the fact that we haven't even seen Osama bin Laden in years?
Thomas, you're absolutely right. I mean, what's happened is that organization has really been shredded. What we have seen is really a shift, and al-Qaeda is in some ways has become far more distributed across the world, far more individualized, and far more difficult. A perfect example is al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Right. What we're seeing out of Yemen right now is completely separate from what we were seeing out of Afghanistan. And in fact, Osama bin Laden was nothing more than essentially a figurehead with no role whatsoever to play in much of that area. But you know what? There is one thing about this that I think is critical, and that is this. If we think about Osama bin Laden alive over the last essentially 10 years, every day that he was alive, it showed sort of incompetence and impotence for the Americans. Mm-hmm. They couldn't kill this one man. And I think on a worldwide basis, now what the Americans, I think, are going to try to do here is reassert the point that we will do, and President Obama said this, that we will do what we must and can before people are questioning whether we can.
Jack, wasn't there, there's also sentiment that with U.S. military operations withdrawing troops in July, that most likely Afghanistan would have welcomed back Osama bin Laden?
That was always the fear. I think about walking the streets of Kabul or Kandahar with the 82nd Airborne, mm-hmm. or other parts of the world, that what you see here is this vacuum that's created by the Americans. But see, that's been part of the problem. I mean, if you think about really how the Americans dealt with much of what we're dealing with here, I mean, essentially, the U.S. after 9/11 turned the world upside down and shook it. The problem was we could never shake loose Osama bin Laden. But what we also did is we created a lot of very angry people at the very same time, some of them being driven, if not in the direction of Osama bin Laden, away from the United States. And we've sort of had to struggle to find that places that is not you're either with us or against us, to go back to President Bush, but rather you're either with Osama bin Laden or you're not. And we need to understand that distinction because I believe it to be critical.
Jack Rice. Jack, thanks for joining us tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
We want to know more about how this Special Forces operation went down in Pakistan, just 35 miles from the capital of that country. NBC's Jim Koszewski is at the Pentagon with more on that. Mick, what can you tell us? Good morning.
Good morning, Matt. Remarkably, U.S. intelligence officials weren't certain that Osama bin Laden was even at that compound north of Islamabad. According to one U.S. official, there was no smoking gun that put him there. But in the end, the evidence was compelling enough for President Obama to give the Navy SEALs the green light to attack. Friday morning, just minutes before departing the White House on his way to inspect tornado damage in Alabama, President Obama gave the order to launch the operation to kill Osama bin Laden. More than 2 days later, U.S. Special Operations Forces attacked bin Laden's heavily fortified compound at Abbottabad, 35 miles north of Islamabad. 1 a.m. Monday morning, Pakistan time. In a scene straight out of an action thriller, U.S. helicopters loaded with American commandos closed in for the kill. On approach, one helicopter had mechanical problems and crash-landed, but no one on board was hurt. Within seconds, the two Special Forces teams flooded the compound and immediately came under heavy fire. And it was obvious bin Laden would not be taken alive. U.S. officials say armed with an automatic rifle, the al-Qaeda leader fired on the Americans, who then shot and killed bin Laden.
Then the first bang came, 3 other consecutive bangs came. Then there was 1/5 final bang, which made the whole sky orange. That's when I had to duck also. I thought, this is something really big.
In the exchange, the Navy SEALs also killed 2 al-Qaeda couriers and one of bin Laden's adult sons. One woman, who the al-Qaeda gunman used as a human shield, was also shot and killed. When the shooting stopped, the Americans loaded bin Laden's body on a helicopter to be transferred to Afghanistan. Nearly 10 years after 9/11, the operation to kill bin Laden was over in 40 minutes. Now, bin Laden's body was buried at sea, in part to prevent any gravesite from becoming a shrine to terrorists. But before that, intelligence analysts made detailed comparisons to photos of bin Laden to make sure that it was him, and as to make a positive identification that it was bin Laden. DNA testing should be completed later today.